827.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello again, everyone. I'm Frederica Whitfield. Thank you so much for joining us for our special breaking news coverage of the crisis in Russia. Also joining us, CNN Chief International Anchor Christian Amanpour in London. Christian, I'll join you again in a moment. So let's begin this hour with perhaps the biggest threat to President Vladimir Putin's iron-fisted control over Russia in decades. Putin is accusing the head of the mercenary Wagner group of an armed rebellion. The group's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has been a longtime ally of the Kremlin, which relied on his soldiers for its war on Ukraine. But yesterday, he accused Russia of attacking his mercenaries. And Prigozhin now says his private army has seized control of Russian military facilities in two critical cities. The first is the city of Rostov. That's about 700 miles south of Moscow. The second city is Voronezh, about a halfway point on the road to Moscow. Even closer to Moscow, the city of Lipetsk, where Russian media reports Wagner groups have been spotted moving through the town. Prigozhin is threatening to push on to the capital of Russia's top general and defense minister if they don't meet with him.
Again, we came here. We want to receive the Chief of General Staff and Shoigu. Until they aren't here. Until they aren't here, we will be located here, blockading the city of Rostov, and we'll go to Moscow.
President Putin calls the actions by Prigozhin a betrayal and a stab in the back to the Russian people. In an ominous sign, Russian armored vehicles began appearing on Moscow streets last night. And Russian media reports public events have been suspended until July 1 in the Moscow region. Putin is warning those who follow Prigozhin that they will pay the price.
All those who deliberately chose the path of treachery, who prepared an armed mutiny, who chose the path of blackmail and terrorist methods will face inevitable punishment and will answer both to the law and to our people.
Despite that threat, Russian state media is now reporting that authorities have offered amnesty to any Wagner fighters willing to lay down arms. And we just learned that President Biden has discussed the situation in Russia during a call with France, Germany, and the UK. But sources tell CNN the White House was caught off guard by the speed with which this crisis has unfolded. Christian?
Frederica, indeed. And I think not just the United States, but perhaps most of the NATO and G7 allies hadn't quite realized how potentially fragile Putin's grip on power has got because of this war. We continue with our full coverage of this breaking news story. We have CNN's chief international security correspondent, Nick Payton-Walsh, and national security reporter, Natasha Bertrand, and also CNN military analyst, Major General James Spider-Marks. Nick, let me begin with you. We've been talking a lot about what we've seen today. We don't really know exactly what the ultimate goal of Prigozhin is, but it is clearly the biggest challenge to Putin, although he's not naming Putin. What do we think about, or what do we know, do you think, about what his ultimate aim is?
I think it may have inevitably transformed itself through the momentum of his forces moving through Russia. Extraordinary sentence to suggest, from his initial goal, which appeared to be a constant spat with Russia's top brass, now with Vladimir Putin saying essentially this is blackmail, terrorist methods, and saying everybody must inevitably be punished. That really puts Prigozhin and Putin at absolute loggerheads here. I can't really see a situation where Putin can accept what Prigozhin's done and try and put the clock back. But we've seen extraordinarily fast developments today. The Wagner presence in Rostov, controlling key facilities there, unthinkable, frankly, in such a massively important southern town. And through the day, we've seen them slowly moving, it seems, up the M4 highway in the direction of Moscow. Quite what they do when they get there, what kind of Russian forces they're met with on the outskirts of the capital city, unclear. Russia's so sparsely defended. We've already seen how vulnerable it's been on its border areas from Ukrainian-backed militias in recent weeks. But here's what we know today.
It is unimaginable in a country tightly under Putin's control for over 2 decades. But Russians woke up to see this, the vital southern military hub of Rostov-on-Don, under the relaxed control of the Wagner mercenary group. As the day progressed, the blasts seemed to get further up the highway to Moscow, as reports claimed Wagner kept moving towards the capital. Their leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was for years Putin's loyal bagman. Now he is a wanted man, wanted for mutiny, rebellion and terrorism.
I repeat, any internal turmoil is a mortal threat to our statehood, to us as a nation. This is a blow to Russia, to our people. So our actions to defend the fatherland against such a threat will be severe.
Prigozhin now openly challenging his former paymaster.
Президент глубоко ошибся.
As for betraying the motherland, the president is deeply mistaken. We are patriots of our motherland. We have fought and we are fighting, everyone from Wagner PMC. And no one is going to turn themselves in at the behest of the president, the FSB, or anyone else.
This unprecedented challenge to the rule of Russia began on Friday with a speech.
On February 24th, nothing extraordinary happened. But the Ministry of Defense was trying to deceive the public,
Laying out openly how the motive for the war and its conduct was a deceit. Brazen words. Met, Wagner said, hours later, by an airstrike on this, a Wagner camp. The Russian military denied they did it. But Wagner's forces sprang into action, seemingly quite ready and prepared to respond. It's unclear where these units came from, but Wagner had been fighting hard and dying a lot for Bakhmut, and across the front lines were considered some of Russia's most seasoned fighters. The question now is what is left of Russia's military elite, the special forces decimated during the war, that's willing and able to take on Wagner. It would be fratricide in the military, but the startling collapse of Putin's grip on power leaves this as the Kremlin's only choice in the hours ahead, in which yet more unprecedented mayhem is likely to follow.
We just heard a loud bang near the headquarters of the military.
Now, you see a scene there, Christian, from when blasts were heard near an HQ in Rostov, and the reaction there from a reporter in that particular package. Continually, those signs that Wagner forces are moving up the M4 highway. Lipetsk, the next town on from Voronezh, where you saw helicopters in what appeared to be clashes there in that report. Lipetsk is blocking some of the entries and exits, and there are also traffic restrictions on Kaluga, the next town up towards Moscow. On the outskirts of the capital, military positions being set up. So a lot moving, unclear the number of Wagner forces moving towards the capital, but this is a absolutely extraordinary time, one which is clearly going to entirely recalibrate the control Putin has over Russia, if indeed that control survives the coming days. And I think the possibility of some sort of last-minute rapprochement between Prigozhin and Putin increasingly remote, given the nature of the exchanges we've seen today and the fact that there is a Wagner armoured column marching on the capital. Christian?
Which, as you know, is much smaller than what Russia could mobilize if they can mobilize. And as you say, we're going to have to wait to see, indeed, whether they are enough to actually stop the Wagner column. We'll see. Nick Payton-Walsh, thank you very much. Now, it is said that some top Ukrainian officials believe that the next 48 hours will be critical, or at least it will bring clarity. Natasha, you've got some reporting on the U.S. military and their movements. Tell us about what you've just learned.
That's right, Christian. So we are learning that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, he actually was scheduled to travel to the Middle East this weekend, beginning with Israel, but he has actually canceled that trip in order to stay in Washington to monitor these developments as they unfold. So clearly the administration is taking this very seriously, and they want Biden's entire national security team to really remain in place so that they can continue to brief him on these developments as they unfold here. Now, what U.S. intelligence officials are watching for, of course, is how far Prigozhin and Wagner Group can actually get. It is unclear at this point whether Prigozhin is threatening Putin himself or simply Russia's military leadership, and of course, how far he is actually willing to go to make his point that he believes that the Russian military and its operation in Ukraine Ukraine is inept. So it remains to be seen how long, of course, he has been planning this, whether this was a spur-of-the-moment decision or whether he has been planning it for much longer. And U.S. intelligence officials will also be watching to see how long he can sustain this push, because one European intelligence official told me that they expect that it is possible that Wagner could begin to run into some supply shortages within the next 24 to 48 hours. So all of this coming at a moment, of course, when President Biden is going to Camp David. He is expected to be accompanied by some of his national security team, including his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. They're continuing to watch, of course, how much this destabilizes Russia, whether any weapons or equipment there are put at risk, and, of course, whether this could spread further and destabilize the broader region, Christian.
Natasha, I'm being told that quite clearly the top NATO allies, the G7 allies, are seeing that potentially Putin's grip on power is more fragile than they might have thought even a day or two or a week ago, but that they're clearly, and you can see that, I just want to know your opinion on this, refraining from any substantive description of what's going on so that they are not accused by Putin of some kind of Western-backed, backing up of Prigozhin. Is that what you're getting when you ask them those questions?
Yeah, Christian, this is a very deliberate attempt to just remain silent here. They do not want Vladimir Putin to have any kind of fodder to say that the West was responsible for this armed rebellion, for this rebellion by Wagner and Prigozhin and his forces. They do not want to give Putin any capability to tell his populace that this is actually all kind of a NATO and U.S.-backed effort. So that is why the U.S. is staying deliberately silent at this time. Christian.
Natasha, thank you. General Spider Marks, he is joining me right now. So, do you think that Prigozhin has the military might to march to Moscow if he wants to?
Well, he certainly can get to Moscow. The issue is, what is he going to do when he gets there?
Right.
First of all, he has a very limited force. He also has to be able to protect his supply lines en route. If he thinks he can move with impunity, he's wrong. So he has threats along the route. Although, let's be frank for a second, the Russian military has demonstrated in Ukraine that they have very limited ability to strike mobile targets. So I would think a Wagner force on a highway en route Moscow is not going to be challenged by the Russian military because they can't hit a thing, and they've demonstrated they can't hit a thing. Maybe that's being a bit flippant. But I think the Wagner group clearly is on the march to Moscow, but I'm not clear what they're going to do when they get there. I think this is more narrative than it is substance in that regard.
Okay, well, you have to explain what that means, because they're doing stuff, and Putin has put a target on his back. I mean, he said people who are involved in this will be punished. There are those, including exiles, who believe that Putin might actually try to take Prigozhin out. So we know that his Wagner force are essentially paramilitaries. Does Prigozhin have allies within the military who he could say, watch us, we've done the dirty work, literally, on the battlefield, and, come with us, don't stop us?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the notion of any port in a storm, right? The Russian military has demonstrated an incredible immense of incompetence, absolutely unprecedented, underestimating their enemy, overestimating their own capabilities. Wagner needs to be very conscious of that type of miscalculation as well. So I think what Prigozhin has demonstrated, although he's done a really good job of disenfranchising the military and speaking ill of the military and getting no response from Putin or anybody in terms of the issues that Prigozhin has indicated that he has to deal with. So I think what he's hoping for, that as a result of potentially some success en route Moscow and what he has demonstrated so far, that there will be some movement inside the military toward him. Right now, I see those two elements as completely diabolically or completely at opposite ends here. I don't see that the Russian military and the Wagner group have any type of appeal for each other. I do see that if there is success by Wagner, there could be some movement toward him by military leaders.
And can we just be very clear that Prigozhin believes that actually he's waging a war, or a verbal war, against the elite, and that he actually wants to see mass mobilization in Russia and a doubling down of the war effort by Russia? So if you were a Ukrainian commander right now, What would you be doing to take advantage of this situation?
Christian, the thing that I would be telling my soldiers is pay attention to, and stay focused on the plan that we have. Let's execute our plan on the ground. Let's not be distracted. Let's not put ourselves at risk. Let's not give any type of calculations to the enemy that they're not paying attention, that they now are weakened, that their back is turned and they're focused in the direction of Moscow. Let's not do that. Stay on plan. Stay focused, maneuver, use fires, good intelligence, continue to determine where the Russian forces are weak, and then let's exploit those. Let's not pay attention to the strategic babble. That's not affecting, nor should we let it affect, the ground engagement.
Yeah. Let me just ask you about that, because to be frank and to be fair, we have not heard, those of us outside Ukraine, have not seen huge results from this counteroffensive. A huge amount of rhetoric was put on that, a huge amount of expectations, and it's sort of, I don't know, plodding along. But our correspondent there, Ben Wiedemann, has reported that they've seen a lot of armor, of personnel down towards the south. Can you see this being a moment to punch through in that vital strategic area?
The only way that they're going to punch through, Christian, is if the opportunity presents itself. Mm-hmm. It's not what's taking place in Moscow. It's totally irrelevant what's taking place on Instagram. What's relevant to those soldiers in that engagement is what's in front of them. And as you've indicated earlier, let's look at what the Russians have been able to do over the course of the last 5 months. They have created a defense in depth. Yeah. That by itself is a barrier that's very difficult to penetrate. It gives the Russians an advantage. They are in place, and the Ukrainians cannot assume that they are not there. They have to be able to stick to the plan until there's a reason to divert.
Yeah, exactly. And if command and control collapses, that might be also a reason. We'll see. General Spider Marks, thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Still to come, US and Western allies, as we said, caught somewhat off guard by the escalation in Russia. And we'll go to the White House next. Plus, we'll speak to a Kremlin supporter and a Putin ally. He'll join me live from Moscow just ahead.
Online today to save up to 30%.
Welcome back. We're following breaking news out of Russia right now. President Vladimir Putin facing the greatest threat to his authority since he first gained power 23 years ago. Putin has accused his one-time ally and Wagner chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, of an armed rebellion at two key military facilities in Voronezh and Rostov-on-Don. President Biden has been getting regular briefings on the ongoing power struggle. Let's bring in now CNN's Priscilla Alvarez live at the White House. Priscilla, so President Biden discussed the situation on a phone call with allied leaders. What do we know about what was said?
That's right. He spoke this morning with the leaders of France, Germany, and the UK, a trio that he has been speaking with over the course of the war in Ukraine and staying aligned with along the way. So having that call this morning in the White House, saying in a readout, quote, the leaders discussed the situation in Russia. They also affirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine. Now, President Biden has been updated over the course of the day over the evolving situation on the ground in Russia. Earlier today, he was briefed by his national security advisor, as well as Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Austin. All of this according to the White House. Now, we should note that as of early January, administration officials had been monitoring a power struggle between the mercenary Wagner group and the Russian government. And officials believe that tensions would mount over time, and that is what we are seeing play out on the ground now. Now, officials are still being cautious over how much they weigh in because this is all rapidly evolving. But a key part of the strategy is to talk to allies and partners. So President Biden doing that earlier today, but also in addition to some of his top officials, Secretary of State Antony Blinken also holding a call with G7 allies and EU counterparts, again reaffirming the support for Ukraine. So all of these conversations continuing to happen behind the scenes. President Biden shortly ago is headed to his presidential retreat at Camp David, where he is also traveling with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, which really indicates that this is a fast developing situation and one that the president and the Vice President Harris will be updated on regularly throughout the day. Fred.
All right, Priscilla Alvarez, thank you so much. Of course, you were looking at video taking at one of the two Russian cities where Wagner Group members have been seen, an eyewitness there. All right, thank you so much, Priscilla. Coming up next, those who betrayed Russia will be held accountable. Ominous words from President Putin vowing a strong response. Straight ahead, we'll speak with a Putin ally live in Moscow. Stay with us.
20% off. Shopguild.com today.
Now, all these rapid developments are coming after Russia opened a legal case against the chief of the Wagner private military group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. On Friday, Prigozhin had accused Russian military leaders of striking a Wagner military camp and killing, quote, a huge amount of his mercenary forces. This social media video shows the alleged strike, but CNN cannot verify its authenticity, and Russia's defense ministry has denied his accusation. CNN's Matthew Chance has more from Kyiv. And a warning: his report contains some disturbing images.
These are the chaotic scenes posted by the Wagner mercenary group of what they say is their forest camp struck by the Russian military. In a clearing, trees appear to have been smashed, some with fabric strewn from their branches. Through a gash in the soil, a fire burns in what appears to be a destroyed bunker. There are gruesome images too, of a corpse in the undergrowth, as well as severed body parts. The Russian Defense Ministry denies any role in this, but a furious Wagner leader is vowing revenge.
Those who destroyed our guys today, along with tens of thousands of lives of Russian soldiers, will be punished. I ask no one to put up any resistance. Justice for the troops will be restored, and then justice for all of Russia.
It's a threat of violence now posing a major challenge to the authority of President Putin. The Kremlin says all necessary measures are being taken. And now the Russian security service has opened a criminal case into what they say is a call for armed rebellion. Patience with Prigozhin appears to have finally run out. The Wagner chief, whose mercenaries have played a key role in the Ukraine war, has long been at odds with Russia's military command, accusing them repeatedly of mishandling the conflict. But recent weeks have seen tensions escalate after the Kremlin ordered all Russian mercenaries to sign contracts with the defense ministry in a move seen as a crackdown on Wagner. In the hours before the alleged strike on the Wagner camp, Prigozhin stepped up his war of words, accusing the defense ministry of tricking the country into an unprovoked invasion back in February last year.
On February 24th, nothing extraordinary happened. But the Ministry of Defense was trying to deceive the public, to deceive the president, and say that there was insane aggression on the part of Ukraine and that they were going to attack us together with NATO. The war was not needed in order to return Russian citizens to our bosom, and not needed in order to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine.
It is a bold, even dangerous criticism of Russia's war that may be plunging the country into turmoil. Matthew Chance, CNN Kyiv.
So you can see there Prigozhin, questioning Putin's very justification for this war. And honestly, we're just going to have to see whether this threat by Prigozhin continues, whether it fizzles, whether Putin can maintain the upper hand. For now, we're just going to wait and see what happens as the drama is unfolding. President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine tweeted, "The longer Russia keeps its troops in Ukraine, quote, the more chaos, pain and problems it'll have for itself later." So what does all this mean for Ukraine? And CNN is on the ground there. That's ahead.
Can go with you. Talk to your healthcare provider today.
My name is Shannon Knight, and I own Little Knights Daycare.
Carolina Sports Incorporated, a paradise for parents. Lamita Feed, current caretaker and owner. We did not know anything about the employee retention credit. That is a legitimate tax credit.
So Innovation Refunds has really helped guide me through the process.
Just had to get a few of my records together, submit that, and they made it as painless as possible. I can't thank Innovation Refunds enough for what they did.
Meet 3 students, all learning to save and spend their money with Chase. Freedom for kids? Thank you, Chef. Control for parents? Nice. One bank for both. Chase. Make more of what's yours.
After months spent preparing for a counteroffensive against Russia, Ukraine is watching a different battle unfold. Russian troops fighting amongst themselves, a welcome sight for war-weary Ukraine. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry tweeting this simply, "We are watching." CNN senior international correspondent Ben Wiedemann joining us live now from Zaporizhzhia. So Ben, how does Ukraine capitalize on this moment?
Well, we've already seen a statement from the Deputy Defense Minister, Frederica, saying that in the eastern part of the country, around the city of Bakhmut, which is now under Russian control, Ukrainian forces have launched an offensive actions in that area. They say they're making progress there. So it does appear that perhaps the Ukrainians are taking advantage of the disorder in the Russian ranks to make progress, to really exploit this very sudden and chaotic situation. Now, we have heard this evening from President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. He said that today the world saw the bosses of Russia do not control anything, nothing at all, complete chaos, complete absence of predictability. So for the most part, throughout the day, actually beginning yesterday evening, Ukrainians have been watching this conflict between the head of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and the military defense establishment in Moscow. What we've seen is, of course, Prigozhin has taken over the southern military district headquarters in Rostov-on-Don. That is the strategic command center for Russian forces in southern Ukraine. That certainly indicates that the Russian military in the occupied parts of this country are in a somewhat difficult situation, having to deal with what is an ongoing counteroffensive launched by the Ukrainians.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. All right, Ben Wiedemann, thank you so much. And of course, we have much more straight ahead. Stay with us.
4th at 7 on CNN.
Welcome back. In a rapidly changing story today, it may have come full circle. We're going to discuss the latest reports from Russia, in which Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, is set to release a new audio file in which he says, and I'm going to read this to you because it changes the situation, quote, "We turning our columns around and going back in the other direction towards our field camps in accordance with the plan." This apparently Prigozhin has just said recently in a message on Telegram, that social media channel. He says that it has come in response to an intervention by the Belarus president Lukashenko, who, as we know, is a close ally of President Putin. And clearly Putin has been trying to do all he can all day to figure out how to change this threat. We've been asking all day, what was Prigozhin's motive? What was he trying to do? Let's get to Nick Payton-Walsh and try to break this down a little bit. Nick, we've been asking, as I said, I've asked you several times, what do you think is the motivation of Prigozhin? And now, how are you reading this apparent turnaround?
Yeah, I mean, important to point out here, the key thing in all of this is where does this leave the Wagner columns that were clearly advancing towards Moscow? Prigozhin's statement talks about how they were concerned about the possibility blood could be shed and that no blood had been shed until this particular point. And then they decided to turn the columns around and leave in the opposite direction to field camps according to the plan. Now, clearly that suggests a retreat of some description. The phrase field camps is interesting, polowe lagary. That might not necessarily suggest headquarters. That might suggest they're parking up somewhere on the road towards Moscow and waiting. He doesn't specifically reference discussions with Lukashenko. That has been a narrative put out by the... Yeah.
Nick, sorry. I'm busy interrupting you. I'm sorry. I was just trying to say something. But let me just follow up. What else he said, and we can discuss it. This, according to, again, Prigozhin. This morning, President Vladimir Putin briefed his Belarusian counterpart on the situation with the private military group. This is what the statement has said. The heads of state agreed on joint actions as a follow-up to the agreements. The president of Belarus, having been additionally informed of the situation and in agreement with the president of Russia, held talks with the head of the Wagner paramilitary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. And then, Nick, it goes on to say that Prigozhin accepted the entreaties of Lukashenko. So let's get back to what you were saying. We don't know where, but he says they're turning around. Where might those field headquarters be?
That is going to be the ultimate question of the hours ahead. Now, they were, he says, within a matter of hundreds of miles of Moscow's city limits. That seems borne out by social media video and statements from officials. So it's a late stage, certainly. Alexander Lukashenko, the strongman of Belarus, a Putin ally, or many say really a sort of sidekick or vassal of President Putin, an odd interlocutor here to suddenly save Vladimir Putin from what looked like the brink. And so I think the focus now will be what has happened in that conversation, what has been said to Prigozhin to make him make this radical decision. Did he always know that potentially trying to run his forces into the capital could be disastrous and has chosen this moment to pull back? But I think it's pretty clear we've gone probably past the point of no return, frankly. It would be very curious to me to find Putin and Prigozhin after day suddenly deciding they wanted to make things right and wind the clock back. So we do have these forces moving or possibly turning around slightly on the way towards Moscow. Unclear what that necessarily means. As I say, it is odd that Belarus is the interlocutor here, essentially saving the Kremlin from this extraordinary moment. And I think, too, it speaks to whether or not Yevgeny Prigozhin intended to go all the way to the capital. It seemed like that was certainly his longer-term ambitions. Did he find the forces arrayed against him simply weren't there, or was he concerned he'd meet something else when he got to Moscow? But I think really we're going to learn more probably about what these conversations have contained, what Prigozhin may have been offered, what he may feel is better in his interests. But look, you can't look at the last 24 hours and think it has not irrevocably damaged Vladimir Putin's control over Russia. You simply don't see things like this. And even now we have this last-minute possible moment of reprieve. There's still significant changes now to Russia's posture on the front lines, and a very damaged Kremlin leader who's had to have Alexander Lukashenko, a man who he treated as subordinate, frankly, it seems, step in and get Prigozhin to step back. Christian.
And Nick, as we're talking, it just reminds me of what Prigozhin did about a month ago during their, the celebration of their military day, when he said, "I'm leaving the Bakhmut area because you guys aren't giving me enough ammunition," and he's threatened to, take his troops out only to reverse that. Look, let us go now for more very important perspective to Moscow itself and to Sergei Markov, who is a close ally of President Putin. And he is the director of the Institute of Political Studies in Moscow. He's a former United Russia MP, that is Putin's political party. So, Sergei Markov, thank you for being with us. Can you tell us, can you fill us in as to whether you're hearing this as well, that the threatened march by Prigozhin on Moscow has been reversed?
Yes, of course, it's very good news, and a lot of Moscovites, I would say, happy about this, because even mayor of Moscow claims that Monday would be not working day, free day, because a lot of Moscovites expected some fighting in the city. And also the number of flights, ticket from Moscow now almost zero. A lot of people decided to left the capital of Russia. So it's good news. But same time, I'm frankly speaking expected that some kind of negotiations should be, because both sides appear to be in the deadlock. If, for example, Prigozhin come to Moscow, what in fact he can get? The leadership in Russia to surround Vladimir Putin? No chance, because Vladimir Putin's popularity now something about 80%, and everybody in elite governors, deputies, everybody expressed his support to Vladimir Putin. But also, on another hand, for Vladimir Putin, to crash by military ways Yevgeny Prigozhin Wagner groups, it's a very bad solution, because Wagner group is the best private army in the world. it's needed on the front line in Ukraine. And also, to crash them, Vladimir Putin will have to take a lot of Russian troops from the Ukrainian front, which can open the window, the door for the Ukrainian army counteroffensive. So it was a very difficult situation. The solution had been found, and it's a little bit natural solution. Only psychological private ambitions can undermine this possibility of the deal.
Sergei Markov, President Putin called it an armed insurrection. The others said that it was a coup. Obviously, Prigozhin actually kept denying that it was a coup. I don't know what he was talking about. He said it was a march for justice. What do you think Prigozhin's motivations were then?
I know a little bit Yevgeny Prigozhin. He's extremely aggressive. Also, this conflict between Yevgeny Prigozhin and Russian Defense Ministry, which is state bureaucracy, a little bit familiar the conflict, for example, between Elon Musk as big businessman with United States bureaucracy, and conflict was of Jack Ma with Chinese bureaucracy. It's classical conflict. To our regret, Russian big business, not as Elon Musk, but on the military field. And he's very aggressive. And he has personal relationship with Vladimir Putin even 30 years ago. And he was a little bit upset the fact that his enemy, whom he regarded as Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, his chief. And he had endless conflict with Russian defense minister. So it was some kind of his appraisal, not against Vladimir Putin, but against a little bit ultra-bureaucratic system of Russian army.
So what do you make then? I mean, here you are, a full-throated defender of your president and of the war. What do you make of the fact that there didn't seem to be much resistance to Wagner's movements in the last 24 hours? They took over the HQ in Rostov-on-Don. I mean, that's a big deal. Then they kept moving up to, Voronezh and Lipetsk with no resistance. I mean, that can't be very good psychological feeling for Putin, can it?
You're absolutely right. And of course, this reflects one of the essence of those conflicts. Because this is not only a conflict between big business and state bureaucracy, it's also a conflict between those parts of Russian society who demand from Vladimir Putin to be more tight, to be less polite, to be less moderate, and to have not special military operation, but real war against Ukrainian state, against Ukrainian government. And that's why a lot of Russian militaries, they see Wagner fighters not as enemies, but as real heroes. They don't want to take part in the military clashes between them. And the point is now, by popularity, Yevgeny Prigozhin is on the fifth position, and he is more popular than Russian defense minister. And that's why big Russian part of Russian population really support Yevgeny Prigozhin. But they support his fighting against Ukrainian army, but not against Vladimir Putin.
Okay, so that was I was going to ask you. Do you think he was an actual threat to Vladimir Putin? And you're saying no.
No, he was not actual friend, except possible Putin tough mistakes. And Yevgeny Prigozhin doesn't want to overthrow Vladimir Putin, but he can create third war. Look, Russia has situation with Ukrainian army first. Russia has the war, not only with Ukrainian army, the war against whole global Western coalition. And now third war. Too difficult even for the great leaders Vladimir Putin to have same time 3 wars.
Well, we're going to see whether he can prosecute his first war And we'll have you back. Sergei Margov, thank you very much for joining us at this crucial turning point in this story that we've been monitoring very closely for the last 24 hours. And we will have much more just ahead.